Haramai, good morning. This is Judith Lay welcoming you to Manx Radio and to the podcast of this week's edition of At Your Service. Manx Radio! On the programme today, slavery is a thing of the past, isn't it? Dan's story reveals the shocking truth that slavery is very much a present-day problem. And a Nigerian woman takes us on a faith journey from Lagos to London. But first, on the opening day of COP26, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, let's reflect for a few moments on the fragile beauty of our wonderful planet and the need to care for and respect it and every living thing upon it. That was the Cambridge Singers, conducted by John Rutter, and For the Beauty of the Earth. COP26, the latest round of global climate talks, starts today in Glasgow, and over the next 12 days, thousands of government delegates and people from civil society, business and the media will gather to advance climate action. For nearly 3 decades, the United Nations has been bringing together almost every country on Earth for global climate summits, called COPs, which stands for Conference of the Parties. In that time, the issues of climate change have moved from the edges of political and social debate to the very centre as the global priority of our day. Under the presidency of the United Kingdom, COP26 must be a turning point. It must deliver bold, large-scale and rapid actions by national leaders for people and the planet. Countries must come together and collaborate to rebuild trust, re-energise action and deliver in full on the promises made in the Paris Agreement in 1995. The United Nations website is a good way to follow the progress of the conference, with regular news updates, live coverage, videos and podcasts, and the address is very easy: www.un.org. A few days ago, our local Isle of Man Christian Aid coordinator, Louise Whiteleg, hosted a visitor, her colleague Chine McDonald, Head of Community Fundraising and Public Engagement at Christian Aid, who is also a broadcaster, an author and a passionate campaigner for a just solution to the climate crisis which is crippling the world's poorest people. For Chine, the plight of black and brown people across the globe losing their lives due to flood, drought, crop failures and racial violence support her view that the issues of ethnicity, poverty and climate change are tightly interlinked. Her latest book, God is Not a White Man, is a memoir about being black and female in a church and a country that places most value on white males. Chine was here for just one day, but despite her packed schedule, meeting members of government and fulfilling speaking engagements, I managed to record a conversation in which we explored Chine's own faith journey that began as a child in Lagos, Nigeria, then developed in London, where her experiences inspired her book. Chine is married to a Yorkshireman who's a children's social worker. They have a 3-year-old son and are expecting their second child next May. Meet Chine McDonald.
I think for me, my faith journey began years before I was born. I was born in Nigeria, in the southeast of Nigeria. I'm from the ethnic group called the Igbo group, known as Biafra, so the part that tried to break away from Nigeria in the 60s in the Civil War. But in my family history, there are lots of priests and vicars and lots of Christians. So I come from a very Christian family. And Nigeria is split between Muslims and Christians, but I'm from the Christian part. And one of my most vivid memories, I think, is hearing about my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was ordained in the Church of England in 1940, but in the rural area of southeast Nigeria. And he and my great-grandmother ran a school for Christian wives. And I used to find this absolutely fascinating until I realised that what they meant by a school for Christian wives was a place where young Nigerian women, before they were going to get married, would come and stay with my great-grandparents and learn what it meant to be good Christian wives. But what that meant was they learned how to bake cakes and drink tea and use lace and be very English, really, rather than Christian. So I feel like from decades before my Christian faith began, my family's Christianity was intertwined with ideas of Englishness and colonialism. So that was my kind of before I came onto the scene. I was born in Lagos, one of the busiest cities in the world, and moved to the UK when I was 4 years old. And we moved to southeast London and grew up going to lots of different types of churches, different denominations. My mother was raised an Anglican, my father was raised a Methodist, and when we arrived in the UK we went to Baptist churches or sometimes Church of England churches or new evangelical churches. And we arrived in England in the 1980s, late 80s, and London wasn't as diverse then as it is now. So sometimes we would arrive at churches in either London or in the home counties, and as a family of five turning up, a black family of five turning up at the door of churches, we'd sometimes be asked, oh, what made you choose this church to come to today rather than the black church down the road? Now, it never occurred to my parents that they would need to go to a black church. They just thought that they would be welcome in God's family, wherever in the world it was. So that kind of caused, I guess, some questions around belonging and identity and welcome. But yes, raised pretty much within the evangelical church for most of my kind of teenage years. And I guess probably the most formative time in my faith journey was going to Cambridge University to study theology and religious studies. I had wanted to be a journalist. I remember I was 15 on the news desk of the Independent newspaper, doing some work experience there, and I got some advice from the features editor who said, well, you're black and you're a woman, so if you want to be a journalist, I would advise you to go to the best university you can, study anything, because journalism is still very much an old boys network. So I thought, well, I'll go to Cambridge then, and ended up there. But I thought, well, what's my favourite subject? What am I really interested in? I was really interested in theology and religious studies, so ended up studying that. But I found that, honestly, the most challenging time in terms of my faith, because I honestly hadn't questioned a lot of my faith until I got to university. Even in the first term at university, it was exploring academically the synoptic gospels, or the Christmas story was ripped apart, or thinking about evolution and how apparently it didn't tally with Christianity. And all of these questions I hadn't had and these doubts started to creep in. I found it really challenging. And I remember getting to a point where I thought, actually, academically, I can write you an essay that says God doesn't exist, and I can write you an essay that says God does exist. But for me personally, my personal experience and those moments in which I have felt an experience of God can't be questioned. And actually, if I believe in God, then I believe in a God who's able to handle questions and to be able to handle doubt, and is bigger than all of those challenging questions.
Did your identity become more important to you, and developing that Nigerian identity, did that become much more important to you then?
Definitely. I think having been an immigrant in the 1980s to England and having to really assimilate as much as possible into British culture in order to be accepted, I probably spent a lot of time denying my Nigerianness and my Nigerian culture and wanting to appear, the same as everyone else, not wanting to stand out. So I was very much British and, I wasn't Nigerian. But then when I got to university, Cambridge being a very white-dominated university, there were more people at Cambridge with the surname White than there were black people at the time when I was there in the early 2000s. And I had various encounters with some academics and lecturers which were, not horrifically racist, but they displayed some prejudice. I remember being at one of those grand dinners that we used to have. It was my matriculation dinner, so it was the first or second night. And I was next to an academic who looked at my plate and said, oh, I bet you're not used to this kind of food at home. And it was kind of chicken and potatoes, which I had before. So the idea that I was different and other and not necessarily someone who belonged in that space. And so, yes, I probably after that felt much more, well, if you're not going to accept me, I need to kind of have some kind of sense of my own culture and my own identity. And it was after university that I went on a concerted effort to get to know my heritage more. So I joined an Igbo cultural society where I learnt a bit more about how to cook Nigerian food, about our history, about our language that I couldn't speak before that. Got lots more Nigerian friends because most of my friends were white and English. So yes, definitely post-university went on a journey of learning more about my culture. And since then, I have embraced both cultures. I am fully British, but I'm also fully Nigerian. And those two things can coexist in one person, and those two senses of home.
God is not a white man. It's the title of your book. You were raised to think of God as a white man.
Well, yes. If you look at the literal depictions of God that most of us would call to mind if we were to think of God or Jesus throughout history, you will see a white man. God as an old white man with curly white beard who looks a bit like Father Christmas. Jesus as a sandy-haired, blue-eyed man who doesn't look like he was born in the Middle East. And why is it that we have those images? We have those images of God because whiteness is seen as the most perfect or the most powerful or the closest to godliness. And all of that perpetuates ideas of whiteness as being better than everything else. And yes, it's really only in recent years that I've started to question the images that I have of God in my own mind. If I'm being honest, when I think about Jesus, if I picture Jesus now, I will still picture a white man. I think sometimes people assume that, well, white people see white Jesus and brown people see brown Jesus. But actually, one of the things that is so disturbing about these white Jesus images is that if you go to Christian homes in Nigeria or in India, you will find white Jesus there too. And it's about this globally pervasive idea that God is white and that Jesus is white and that whiteness is superior to everything else. I actually think that the same is true of Mary, because I think most people would picture Mary as a white woman. But I also think that that's the problem with all of the biblical characters that we picture. You know, it's not just that Jesus wasn't white, it's that there were hardly any white people at all in the Bible at all. So all of the biblical heroes, David, Moses, Solomon, Abraham, Isaac, none of them were white people. But it takes some people a little moment to register the whitewashing, I guess, of the whole of the Bible. With Mary, there is an added element, which is this idea of purity as whiteness, virginity, and kind of aligning her kind of pure alabasterness with her whiteness as well, which I think adds another dimension.
Jesus drew together people who wouldn't necessarily, culturally at that time, have associated with each other. And if we, as you say, whitewash everything, we take out the power of what Jesus was doing, don't we?
Yes, there is a globally pervasive idea that white people are the default human, when we know that's not the case. Most people in the world aren't white. But what we're thinking about here, we're thinking about centuries of colonialism and white people going into other places and establishing themselves as superior. It's really in recent years, probably in the past 5 years even, that I have started to understand the strength that comes with seeing God not as white or part of one particular culture, but I feel like when we put God into this kind of limited box, white-shaped box, we limit who God is. I think God is bigger than that. I think God is bigger than white culture, than black culture, than Asian culture. God is the God of all people. So what must that mean then? That means that God is diverse, beautiful, like wondrous and creative. And those are the things that we need to celebrate and recapture. I think when God is white or portrayed as white, then lots of people are excluded from that. And I'm finding it really interesting to think about God in different ways, even in my mind. I spoke at a Church of England school last summer, and I asked them, I think they were year 5 pupils, I asked them, well, what do you think God looks like? And I was absolutely amazed by their answers, because I thought that they would say, well, God looks like Father Christmas. But they said, I think God looks like a ball of energy. And another said, I think God looks like a yin-yang sign, half black and half white. And I thought, wow, these children have probably a better understanding of what God might be than those of us who limit God into this white man-shaped box. So I'm trying to see God a bit more like that, a bit more like a ball of energy. I also realise that some of these things that I talk about can be uncomfortable for people, and they can make people feel shame or guilt or want to be defensive. And that's the reason why in my book, really, I tell personal stories about my life in order to combat some of the walls that might come up, because I think that's the way to get to people, is to share human stories and say, this was my experience of the world, what's your experience of the world, and have those two-way conversations.
Thank you, Chine McDonald. Chine's book, God is Not a White Man, is available online to download as an ebook or as an audiobook, and you can buy a hard copy from Church's Bookshop, who are now in St Thomas's Church in Finch Road here in Douglas. This music, Someone Cares, by the International Staff Songsters of the Salvation Army, is a very appropriate introduction to my next guest. We might want to think that slavery is a thing of the past, but it isn't. Dan lives in England and was a modern-day slave until he was rescued and given a new life through the quiet, consistent care and support of the Salvation Army.
He seemed a decent person at first. He seemed a decent bloke who had a lot of good things in his life and I didn't at that time. He was so popular with everyone. He was driving around in nice cars and he became my friend. He'd take me for meals and stuff like that. It was really nice. The boss of the company I was working for was his best friend and they had complete control over the payroll situation. At first it was to do with some money that he gave me, then it went to more money because I couldn't pay him back. I couldn't escape it, I suppose, because both of them always knew exactly how much money I'd have, when they could take it, what hours I'd be working. It was just a never-ending cycle of me just giving him money, and if I said no, the threats and the violence and stuff would come. If there was weekends to work, they'd make me do them. Like most weeks I was working 75 hours. He used to deal drugs, and there'd been times when he was making me deal drugs but I didn't want to do it. I cried to him and just begged him, like, can you stop doing this to me? It deteriorated to the point where I tried to commit suicide at one point and overdose with the tablets. It wasn't just threats of mental abuse, it was also physical. The scars across my head where he would hit me, the teeth where he knocked my teeth out. But it was the threats of violence towards my loved ones that really was the hardest. Like when someone tells you that they're going to beat your mother up, that is, no man, no woman ever wants to hear that. He just made me feel terrified. He wanted somebody to do whatever they wanted him to do, and that was his way of feeling powerful. It's difficult to say that I was a slave. That sounds terrible, it feels terrible, but I was, and he made me to be there. But I'm thankful I got the opportunity to escape. To be honest, the day was a bit of a blur for me. We was all arrested and I was handcuffed and there was just police everywhere. They did all the searches, they found all the drugs and stuff. At first I was scared, I thought I was going to be in trouble and getting done. Then I was took into the station. Instantly, straight away, they knew what was happening and I was given help. They released me with the other people to make it look like I wasn't helping the police with the inquiries. I got a phone call and he just said, have your bags ready for the morning. And yeah, they took me and that was the last time I seen anybody from that life. I remember leaving my parents' house. They took me halfway across the country. 2 volunteers from the Salvation Army then drove me the rest of the way, which was quite a long way, and I was so scared, I was terrified of what was going to happen to me now. And these 2 ladies was just so lovely, really kind, generous people. They actually talked to me and just made me believe that I was a good person, and they made me feel that a little bit stronger on that first night when all I wanted to do was cry. Things got better from there onwards. I just positively rebuilded, but that's through the help that I got. I learned to cook, to put a chest, to do my washing. They saved my life completely. Everything from being housed, clothed, sometimes even at first fed. Everything the Salvation Army did for me was amazing. Everything, they completely just got me from down the bottom, being terrified, to getting me into a university. I'm now studying. I've also got a full-time job, and I feel like if it wasn't for the Salvation Army, I would be in a completely different place in my life now.
Thank you, Dan, a modern-day slave, saved and helped to live again by the Salvation Army. And now it's notice board time. On the church calendar, today we celebrate All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day on Tuesday, and this is reflected in some special services. In Maccled Parish Church this afternoon at 3:30, there'll be a special All Souls service to remember with thanksgiving those who have died, a gentle and reflective time where everyone will be made most welcome. This evening at 6:30, there'll be a celebration service in Sandygate Chapel. It'll be led by Reverend Brian Yardy with musical items from Sue and Jeff Collier. Also tonight at 6:30, you're warmly invited to a Songs of Praise service at St James's Church in Dalby, and it'll be followed by cake. Tuesday the 2nd of November is All Souls' Day, and at 6:30 there'll be a special service of light in Christchurch in Laxey to remember loved ones who have died. Also on Tuesday night, there's a film night at Castletown Methodist Church. It starts at 7 o'clock, and whilst admission and refreshments are free, donations to church funds would be appreciated. On Thursday, November the 4th, there's a coffee morning in the lounge at Castletown Methodist Church. Pop in for a cuppa and a chat any time between 10 and 11:30. And on Friday the 5th, it's time for a tasty Tabor lunch at Port St Mary Methodist Church. A soup lunch will be served from noon, costing £7 per person. Saturday the 6th is the first Saturday of the month, so there's a craft market at Glenmay Chapel and Community Centre, open from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m, selling homemade produce and handicrafts by local artists, gifts, knitwear, jewellery, artwork and much more. Entry is free, and there'll be homemade light lunches as well as those famous bacon baps with tea, coffee and cake. And when you've been to Glenmay, you might like to stay on the west coast and enjoy a Hollantide hoolie at Dalby Schoolrooms next Saturday evening, the 6th of November, starting at 7:30. It's a bistro-style folk evening with Al and Katie Lawrence, Chris and Babs Killier and others. A casual night with a medley of music, including folk, sea shanties and a bit of blues too. Tickets at £12.50 include a hot pot supper, followed by apple crumble and custard. You're welcome to bring your own wine or beer. For COVID precautions, there will be a limit on numbers to maintain plenty of space, so book early to be sure of your place. Ring Gilly on 844 031, stating if you have any special dietary requirements. Proceeds from the evening will benefit two charities, Alana's Gift to support the children with special needs at St John's School and the Manx charity Bees for Burundi, as well as the Dalby Church Restoration Fund. And looking ahead to next Sunday, the 7th, there'll be a fair trade sale in St Columba's Catholic Church Hall in Port Erin, open from noon to 4:30, with soup and roll lunches and afternoon teas available. Fair trade food, crafts, Christmas gifts, decorations and cards will be on sale. Proceeds from the sale of refreshments will go to the Loreto Sisters working with deprived children and trafficked women in Albania. And that's all that we have time for now, but there will be more news from the notice board during sundown tonight from 9 o'clock, when I'll be back with a mix of easy listening music to round off your weekend. Email me, please, with news for the notice board and requests for your favourite hymns. My email address is judithlay@manxradio.com. I do hope you'll come back and join me again later, but for now, this is Judith saying thank you for listening, and I wish you and those you love a blessed and peaceful week, and a very good morning.
Station, Manx Radio.